You clicked the video, I made the video, let's get right into it. Silksong's Kingdom of Faroom is a corrupt, theological, militaristic state thriving on the backbreaking labor of the lower class, dreams of ascension towards divinity, and a brutal relationship with its neighbors that has already led to the extinction of entire populations in the name of expansion, which definitely doesn't sound like any countries in the real world. My lawyers have advised me to move on with the segment. So today we're gonna drop Faroom into the real world, and in doing so, try to figure out its potential GDP and whether it be a minor country or a global threat capable of dominating the modern world. And make sure you stick around until the end, because this is the part where YouTube videos say that. To do this, we're gonna use their currency, their industry, and their population to calculate exactly how powerful this kingdom is. And before we do any of that, we should probably figure out how much their money is worth. And luckily for us, Faroom gives us a surprisingly good way to estimate it. If Faroom is the shining crown of the kingdom, then the underworks are everything holding that crown up. Deep beneath the Golden Palace sits an industrial labyrinth where, as records have described, most of the Citadel's machines are maintained, coated in smog, where workers endlessly slave away in close proximity to deadly hazards like exposed gears or lava pits, with hopes of one day rising to join those in the Citadel itself. TLDR, this place is worse than where your smartphone is made. Probably. Already we see the brutal efficiency of their labor system, which objectively speaking will translate extremely well to their economic strength. Not to step into politics, but some of the greatest economies of our current world run on the grueling work of the lower and exploited class. But imagine if every citizen within Faroom was under this system, and the absolute power of the Citadel allowed for workers to be worked literally to death, only sustained by the meager amount of silk and the knowledge that the divine beings above would reward them for their work. That is the brutal, disgusting, and almost admirable efficiency of Faroom, whose workforce would output at rates that simply cannot be matched by the humane aspects of commerce, and even puts the inhumane sectors to absolute shame. I'm not advocating for this type of work, but speaking to the numbers, it's really impressive. However, in Faroom, as in most rigid hierarchical systems throughout history, the lowest layer ends up doing the most essential work, and no single figure represents the system more clearly than Loam. Loam's job is brutally simple. He runs. And in case you were wondering, no, this doesn't go with you say run. Okay, maybe it does. His movement helps power the infrastructure that keeps the Citadel functioning, and when you help him run, you get paid in rosaries. Rosaries are the in-game currency, and genuinely one of the most stunning aspects of Silksong's world building. To take something so dear to the faithful and create a unit of currency around trading your faith is one of the most breathtaking unspoken details within Faroom, and adds such an overwhelming darkness to how the religion is framed. More on that later. For us though, Loam gives us something extremely useful. If he's paid in rosaries, and we can measure how quickly those rosaries are earned, then we suddenly have a real baseline for how money moves through the lowest layer of Faroom's economy. Instead of guessing what currency might be worth from the Citadel's perspective, we can start with raw labor output and work up from there. So I decided to test it. If you help Loam run on this treadmill just behind him, there's a chance you're rewarded with a single rosary. It isn't guaranteed every time, but it's consistent enough that if you repeat the process, you can measure an average. So I did. I ran the treadmill multiple times in controlled tests, timing each run and recording the payouts. Across 100 Silk Speed Anklet fueled runs, I received 70 rosaries, which if I hadn't sped up the game for convenience, I'd have actually spent nearly a half hour of my limited existence on this planet running on a virtual treadmill in an indie Castlevania about weirdly thick bugs that lost Game of the Year to a game about French painters and whatever the hell Monoko is. That gives us roughly a 70% payout rate. Each full run takes about 30 seconds, which means in a perfect hour of continuous work, you could attempt around 120 runs. If you apply the 70% payout rate to that, you land at about 84 rosaries per hour of continuous labor. With this number alone, we figured out Faroom's minimum wage, but it doesn't necessarily get us closer to what one rosary is equivalent to in USD. And if we're able to bridge this gap between Faroom's minimum wage and its real-world equivalent, we'll have landed on our first concrete value to scale their economic dominance. So let's keep digging. Now that we have a baseline for how fast rosaries can be earned, or in our case, how painful it is to earn them, the next obvious question is simple. What can you actually buy with them? Because earning 84 rosaries an hour sounds horrendously unimpressive, but it doesn't actually mean anything unless we know what those rosaries can actually do in the world. So I started doing what every financially responsible citizen does when they get paid. I began impulse buying random things as quickly as I could. Because Amazon doesn't exist in Faroom, I had to walk to every store I could find. The first thing you notice is that everything in Faroom is monetized. Toll stations for fast travel run around 40 to 80 rosaries, and once you pay, they stay open indefinitely, which is surprisingly generous for a system built in Faroom, if you ignore the part where the rest of your life is probably going to be spent working in smog-filled furnaces or unceremoniously struck down with the last thing you hear before passing to the great pale beyond is Shaw. Add that to the fact that fast travel is banned for the working class, and that the transit system is technically pregnant. Say what you will about this system. Food and drink are the next obvious checkpoint. 1 cup of nectar from the halfway home costs around 10 rosaries. At our loam baseline, that's roughly 7 minutes of continuous sprinting as fast as you humanly can for a single drink. Want your pumpkin spice latte? Well, get on a treadmill and run as if you're in the 2019 hit sequel Zombieland 2, and you'll get it. Maps cost between 40 and 80 rosaries, depending on which one you're buying. That's the same cost as opening permanent fast travel routes, which is kinda hilarious. You can either unlock a toll network forever, or buy a single piece of paper that tells you where you might be, because of course the compass isn't included. I love you, Chakra, but your prices are borderline predatory. Now, these prices tell us the shape of the economy, but they don't tell us yet what a rosary is worth in a way that translates to Earth cleanly. So I kept looking for something better, something physical or industrial, something you can actually imagine being priced in the real world. And then I stumbled on the perfect ingredient. Craft metal is an element found naturally within the rock and bone of Faroom, used by skilled craftsbugs in construction of tools and trinkets. In-game, there are a total of 8 total that we can acquire, all across Faroom, with which we can build things as simple as the Sting Shard, or as you'd know it, Hornet 2's most annoying attack in the original Hollow Knight, to the incredibly complex Agent of Murder and Destruction, the Cogfly. But most interestingly, all 3 Silkshot variants take 1 craft metal. What's interesting about the Silkshots and the Mount Fae original specifically is how much compressive and explosive power they contain. The Mount Fae variant shoots a compressed beam of silk light that ignores armor and instantly travels the full distance that it is capable of. So in layman's terms, this shoots the target at the speed of light. And why is that important, you may ask? Well, if craft metal can contain the energy output of a laser beam with such an impressive impact, then we may have found the closest real-world comparison: titanium. Because titanium is one of the most widely used materials in our modern world, particularly for military development, on account of its extremely efficient weight to strength ratio and its ability to resist impact and heat. So for our purposes and assumptions, let's assume craft metal is a titanium-like metal, because I don't want to spend the rest of the video saying tungsten or something like that. But the final question remains, how much craft metal is in each of these obtainable chunks? And to figure that out, we need to answer one of the most controversial questions in the entire Hollow Knight community. How big are the characters actually supposed to be? From random one-off posts from Team Cherry stating that Hornet can throw her needle 30 yards, which have created measurements that actually make Hornet 5 meters tall, to pixel counting heights and measuring them against in-world equivalents, putting her at just a few centimeters. We have so many conflicting ways to do this. So let's simplify and put her at the average height of a human female, since the scope of this video is to measure Faroom's capacity in the real world. That would put her around 5'3", or, for our brothers and sisters across the pond, 160 centimeters. Shout out to my German audience. So with Hornet's height reasonably solved, we can measure how much one obtainable chunk of craft metal is. I gathered that we would obtain a craft metal chunk roughly the size of Hornet's head, give or take, which now, with the assumption that craft metal is a titanium facsimile to Faroom, we can make our final calculations and determine the dollar value of a rosary. Using my incredible skills in mathematics, I determined that even conservatively, if we obtain a chunk of craft metal around the size of Hornet's unreasonably large head, each chunk would consist of around 1,000 kilograms of usable metal, which in this economy would go for around $15,000 each. With this number, and taking the average cost of craft metal in-game being around 120 rosaries, we can divide $15,000 by the rosary cost and finally land at the magical number we've been searching for since the start of this video. Each rosary that you pick up throughout the game, every devilish little orb that falls off the map or into the spikes and lava, is worth $125 USD. In the halfway home, when you're charged for a single drink of nectar for 10 rosaries, you're handing over $1,000. Every time you go and slaughter one of the Grand Reeds, which drops 32 rosaries, they're holding the equivalent to $4,000 in their pockets. GTA NPCs can suck it with their $20 drops. These guys have almost twice the monthly salary of a minimum wage worker in California just rolling around in their pockets. Want to unlock a fast travel station for 80 rosaries? You just bought a lifetime bus pass for $10,000. And it gets worse. Every time you've bought a simple key from Peb and Bonebottom, an early game purchase of 500 rosaries, you've just handed him the average household income of a family in the United States, or around $62,000 for a key. And if Loam, the lowest ranking worker in the entire kingdom, so hidden away he can barely be found on normal playthroughs, can earn 84 of them in an hour, Loam's hourly wage in USD is 84 rosaries times 125 USD, equaling an average wage of 10,000 USD per hour. That gives him a monthly wage of $1.8 million, assuming only a 40-hour work week, which we know isn't accurate since he works around the clock. Loam's annual wage is $22 million, which is 250 times the median income of a US household. To put it simply, Loam is getting paid to run on a treadmill the same amount as professional athletes are under their yearly contracts, playing at the highest possible level of their respective sports. Loam, this string-legged slave bug, is making more than most people on the planet ever conceive of making in their lifetimes per year. And from here, it only gets more insane, because the middle class of Faroom would earn roughly 3 times that, equaling around 75 million per year, and the upper class would bring in an eye-watering $1.4 billion per year, or 11,200,000 rosaries. If the minimum wage in the US is around $7 per hour with an annual income of around $15,000, and we assume Faroom is a similar structure to the US, who has a GDP of roughly $31 trillion, and use the minimum wage as our anchor number for our calculations, the rough GDP of Faroom, based on this estimate, would be a factor of 1,500 times the US's 31 trillion GDP, or roughly $46 quadrillion. Now, to be clear, calculating GDP this way is not exactly how economists normally do it, but it does give us something important, a rough scale for how powerful Faroom's economy might actually be. The real question is whether that scale makes sense. Because if Faroom is really producing that much wealth, then somewhere in this kingdom there has to be an industry powerful enough to justify it. And that's when I remembered something very important about this world. The name Silksong gives us our perfect answer. And no, I'm not going to calculate how lucrative a K-pop-esque girl group would be featuring Chakra, Lace, Grandmother Silk, and Hornet. That kind of market cap would break the economy. What instead we're going to look at is silk. In our real world, silk is used for many luxury items, from clothing, furniture, and even medical applications, and is already a $20 billion industry. But the process of making high-quality silk, called sericulture, is absolutely mind-boggling. Basically, people will grow a specific type of silkworm and feed them an extremely strict diet. And for the next 3 days, those worms will spin cocoons of raw silk up to 1,500 meters long using their protein-rich saliva. Gross. Then the poor bastards are boiled alive, and another worker must then pull the threads, usually by hand, all before another worker spins the threads into usable silk. And even that is an extreme oversimplification of the process. But for that, you can purchase upwards of a meter of this high-quality mulberry silk for a staggering $250. Now, let's say that there was a creature within this kingdom that could produce enough silk to cover the entire kingdom at will, and not only that, its quality and strength was unrivaled in the world as we know it. And this creature could do this without pause forever. Meet Grandmother Silk. Her capability to produce the best silk imaginable at such high qualities would immediately crash the market and overshadow every other type of silk we currently have. The monopoly that Faroom would have over the silk industry would collapse the market instantly. Why choose to sleep on the linens made from the saliva of wriggling worms when instead you can rest your head on the divine bedspread of the grandmother herself? Already that would create a sustainable market of at minimum $20 billion in just silk exports, considering the absolute low end of what is already currently utilized. But this silk is special. I mean, it's literally divine. The uses for it would extend into the stratosphere, as scientists are already trying to use spider silk in biomedical engineering for regeneration of peripheral nerves, potentially curing diseases like diabetic neuropathy, Guillain-Barré, autoimmune disorders, and even traumatic injuries. Already scientists are using them in surgical sutures, aerospace composites, skin and hair care, lightweight bulletproof vests, and other forms of military application. Considering just apparel and furnishings are the low end of possibility, this new, nearly sci-fi levels of perfection silk would almost immediately propel the burgeoning market into the hundreds of billions alone, reaching into the most profitable markets on the planet. We could see this material completely overhauling entire sectors solely based on its unimaginable potential. And that's not even considering that in-game, silk has already been shown to extend the life of mortal bugs and heal wounds of grievous nature, and we know how insane people get about maintaining their youth. This new sci-fi-esque material would completely overhaul and dominate the most profitable markets across the planet, reaching into every sector with an iron grasp that would turn Faroom into a global market giant with trillions in market potential. So Faroom could already dominate the market without even trying. But what if silk wasn't the kingdom's main priority? What if Faroom wasn't interested in exporting luxury goods and instead focused entirely on war? And I think the first place to look is the Cogwork Core. The Cogwork Core is the mechanical heart of the Citadel, designed and maintained by the architects. Within its vertical structure, a complex of machinery can be found. Pumping the proverbial heart of the kingdom and the robotic figures running it from within are our targets. There are 7 different types of mechanical creatures, ranging from the lowly Cogworker, which is only roughly a third of Hornet's height, all the way to the Cogwork Clapper, which are not only taller than Hornet but carry significantly more mass. And if we assume they are made out of craft metal, then each one of these enemies we meet could cost the kingdom anywhere from 20,000 USD all the way up to 100,000 USD each, using the lowest possible assumptions and only accounting for raw materials. And that's before we even talk about the largest machines Faroom has built, because deep within the Cogwork Core, we meet something far more terrifying. This is the 4th Chorus, a giant mechanical tank that absolutely towers over Hornet in both mass and height. And if we assume some generous numbers for its height and weight, coming out to 2,500 metric tons or 2.5 million kilograms, with a height of around 10 meters tall, each one of these mechanical giants would cost a measly 280,000 rosaries each, or a rough evaluation of 35 million USD in just raw materials. And remember, that's just one machine. A machine Faroom appears capable of producing repeatedly, which means the question isn't how expensive one of these constructs is, it's how many Faroom could build if it actually decided to mobilize its economy. If we compare them to fighter jets, which can exceed prices of 100 million in research, development costs, and manufacturing, with raw materials being relatively low in comparison, each 4th chorus could cost in the hundreds of millions, and there are at least 3 others that we are aware of. Even assuming a low estimate of 100 million per chorus exported, with fleets of smaller Cogwork automata, coupled with the extremely low cost of labor and development, each nation could be outfitted with droves of completely loyal and surprisingly intelligent robots that now completely remove the cost of life from warfare, which is obviously extremely valuable. This wouldn't exactly monopolize military endeavors for Faroom, which would be a $1 trillion enterprise for them, but absolutely would create a huge demand immediately, as the capability of using robots and automatons in the military currently is rather rudimentary, and no military power would want to send in their human lives into an army of Gundams without fleets of their own, and the FOMO cycle begins. In the event Faroom was actually plopped into our real world as a sovereign nation with a GDP in the quadrillions, with a resource-rich land, skilled workers that are theologically obligated to break conventional labor laws, the potential of them running down every single nation consecutively would be unfounded. Their military budget alone, even if it were just 10% of the estimated GDP, would eclipse the entire GDP of every single nation on the planet combined for the last 1,000 years. Faroom's ability to mobilize, purchase, and dominate the planet wouldn't be a matter of if, rather just a question of how long until each nation folds under their immense economic control, or just sheer militaristic presence. And that's just assuming they use the resources available to them on their own nation. Having the purchasing power of this magnitude would fast-track them through scientific eras, and through that would see a scientific growth of unimaginable scale, given their ability to control and dominate their people into cooperation. Ultimately though, we're thankful a world power of this proportion isn't dropped on our heads, because if it were, you would just end up another faithful in their church of billions.